As a result of the successful campaigns of Gaius Julius Caesar, most of the most influential and intransigent Gallic tribes were defeated and subjugated to the supreme authority of the Roman Republic. Gaius Julius actually fully established control over the modern territories of Switzerland, eastern France, southern and eastern Belgium, and western Germany. Roman customs and orders, as well as the willfulness of the viceroys of the Eternal City, very soon forced the Gauls to take up arms. In the territories subjugated by Caesar annually erupted anti-Roman uprisings, which were suppressed with great difficulty. In December of the 54th year before Christ, rebelled tribes of Gauls who lived between the Rhine and Maas. 2 Roman legions that were in the epicenter of the rebellion were exterminated by the Eburon tribal leader Bituriges. This Celtic leader soon led the forces of the united Gallic tribal unions. Thus began the famous Great Gallic Revolt, soon against Rome and Germanic tribes who moved to the west bank of the Rhine. Caesar and his legions defeated the united Gallic army and walked fire and sword through the rebellious territories, restoring Roman power in them. It seemed that this time Gaul was finally subdued. Caesar went to winter quarters in Upper Italy. But already in the beginning of 52nd year of Christ, rebellion broke out on the territory of modern central France. The new rebellion was led by the leader of the tribe Arverni Vercingetorix, who soon assumed the powers of the supreme leader of Gaul. Caesar immediately rushed with an army against the rebellious Gauls. In battles in the open terrain, army Vercingetorix invariably suffered defeats, retreating farther to the northwest. Gauls tried to move to the tactics of guerrilla warfare, making constant surprise attacks on the Romans and organizing frequent ambushes. However, Caesar steadily moved up the Loire, crushing the local tribes. The Roman army captured the main Gallic cities. To slow the enemy's advance and defeat him, Vercingetorix organized the defense of the capital of the Gallic tribes, Bituriges, the fortress of Évaric, today the French city of Bourges. The army Bituriges remained in Évaric, and the main forces of the Gauls located 16 miles from the city in a fortified camp, protected by rugged forests and swamps. According to Caesar, the city had up to 40,000 inhabitants. This information makes it possible to presumably determine the number of its defenders and able-bodied men in 8,000 people. In March-April, Caesar began the siege of the capital Bituriges. The Roman commander was forced to admit that the city was well fortified. Here is how Caesar himself describes the construction of the fortress walls. On the ground are laid in the full length of straight and solid timbers parallel to each other with a gap of half a meter. They are tied together inside with cross beams and thickly covered with earth, and the gaps in the front are densely filled with large stones. Having laid and bound them, another row is placed on top of them, observing the same distance between the timbers, but the timbers, upper and lower, do not come one on top of the other, but each of them within the same distance is firmly restrained by masonry. In this way, the whole building is brought out in rows until the wall reaches the proper height. This construction is quite expedient in the sense of successful defense of cities, because from fire is protected by stone, and from ramming wooden masonry, which cannot be penetrated or pulled out. Storming the walls of Avaricus was possible only from one side, because from the other around the fortress flowed around the winding and swampy river. Caesar set up his camp opposite the only section of the city wall available for attack. The proconsul ordered the rapid construction of a dam to drain the area, mobile assault walls, and 2 siege towers. The main difficulty for the Romans was the supply of food and forage for the army. Flying detachments of Vercingetorix constantly disturbed the Roman camp and attacked the detachments sent in search of food and fodder for horses. To protect the foragers, Caesar had to allocate a large number of guard units. However, problems with the provision of his soldiers experienced not only the Roman commander, but also Vercingetorix. The Gaulish king had to leave his camp and move closer to Avaricus. The siege work of the Romans was generally progressing well. The legionaries did their job, despite the endless day and night forays of the Gauls to set fire to and destroy siege devices and structures. The Celts were also diligent in their constant digging of undercrofts to damage the Roman dam. The higher the Romans built the embankments, the more the Gauls built up the height of their walls and towers with wooden beams. According to British historian Adrian Goldsworthy, the Roman embankment eventually reached 26 meters in height and nearly 110 meters in length. Roman trenches, underground galleries, and other fortifications were constantly pelted from the fortress walls with burning timbers and beams, boiling tar, and stones. Constant frosts alternating with heavy rains also hampered the siege. When the Romans brought their siege towers, mounds, and mobile walls close to Avaricus, it became clear that the city was doomed. On the orders of Vercingetorix, the Bituriges made a general night sortie to try to destroy or burn down the enemy's siege works. The battle lasted almost until morning. Both sides suffered casualties, but the Bituriges were never able to disable the siege towers, dam, and embankments, only damaging them in places with fire, but only slightly. After this failure, Vercingetorix suggested that his allies abandon the doomed fortress. The Biturig army tried to leave Avaric secretly on a moonless night. Suddenly women, old men, the sick and wounded, all those who could not hope to escape the Roman pursuit, tried to stop the Gallic men. When the soldiers did not heed their pleas, the Gaulish women climbed the fortress walls and shouted to their enemies that the city was left defenseless. In the Roman camp, the alarm was raised. The cavalry was ready to go in pursuit. The defenders had to stay in Avarica until the end. The next day, a heavy downpour broke out. Bad weather and weakening the vigilance of the enemy, who did not put up most of the previous posts and sentries, decided to take advantage of Caesar. Under the cover of the rain wall, Roman legions stealthily took the initial positions under the walls of the city and on a conditional signal went to the assault. Roman attack was for the besieged full of surprise, so Bituriges could not offer proper resistance. Caesar's soldiers quickly captured the fortress walls and broke into the city. In the central square, the Gauls tried to organize resistance, lining up in a common wedge. The formidable Roman legions displaced the enemy and mixed their ranks. The defenders began to scatter to their homes or make their way to the city outskirts and gates. The Romans stormed the Gaulish dwellings, giving no mercy to anyone, neither decrepit old men, nor women, nor small children. There was crush and panic in the streets of Avaricus. Caesar's soldiers were advancing from all sides, furiously exterminating the enemy and driving the surviving Bituriges to the city gates. Under internal and external pressure, the squeezed mass of citizens poured out of the gates into the open, where they were immediately attacked by Roman cavalry. Only about 4,000 Gauls were able to escape from Avaricus and tried to hide in the surrounding forests. The Romans pursued the fugitives and mercilessly destroyed on the spot. Only 800 inhabitants and defenders of the Biturig capital eventually escaped the Roman swords and spears, joining the forces of Vercingetorix by nightfall.